to political freedom, including the right to vote, the right to contest in an election, to be voted for, I think is very clear, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, as you've rightly pointed so, in Article 38. And these rights, the same Constitution in Article 88 sets up the institutional framework, the policy and institutional framework through which we can now exercise that right. And I must say, from the general principles of elections or electoral processes in Article 81, we are called upon to ensure that the elections are not only free and fair, but also should take into account the fact that not more than 2/3 of those holding elective posts are from positions are from the same gender. Then in the same Article 81, we are also called upon as a commission and as a society to look at the specific needs of the people with disability. Then we have, of course, provisions around our youth, our women, and of course the marginalized people. The sort of called minority or marginalized people. We like to, even for us from Turkana, we see ourselves as marginalized, and I can actually defend that. So the whole legal framework that supports the realization of the right to vote, the right to participate in the political processes. So we have the Elections Act, which provides the elaborate processes from the pre-election, during the election, and after the election. Then we have the Iebc Act, which sets up the Iebc, which, if I'm lucky, I'll be chairing in the next few months. And that's our main electoral body, which should ensure that the mandate in the Constitution is actually implemented. And that, of course, therefore calls upon institutions like Iebc and others to ensure to make sure the participation of marginalized groups is taken into account in their election planning and regulation. So when you talk about the regulations around voter education, for example, or voter registration, from my experience, and I did mention to the panel that I actually served as a registration officer and then a presiding officer. When you talk about these marginalized groups, you find that sometimes we disenfranchise them in the manner in which we conduct our registration, but also in the manner in which we try to reach them out in terms of voter education. And so for me, you realize in some counties, especially the pastoralist counties in the north, the registered voters are less than what you would essentially expect. The voter turnout during the vote is actually at the lowest. And in some elections, I remember even those ones of 1997 and then 2002, for example, presidential election results were declared even without factoring in those results from some of those regions because the numbers were so dismal and could not affect the overall outcome. So I think as we have conversation around this issue, we need to look at those internal processes, but also external processes, the barriers, and how we can remove those barriers.
So just picking it up from there,
yeah.
I see you have identified some of the challenges that the marginalized people have. And now, given that you identify as one of those people, among those people who are considered to be marginalized in this country, if you're successful and you become the chairperson of the Iebc, what measures then can you put in place through policy that will ensure that these communities, the marginalized communities, are taken care of within the electoral processes, right from the voter registration to voters' education to voting, and their, their intention at the ballot counting. You say that, like the IEBC declared results without considering their will, so that to ensure that their will does count as much as it does for other Kenyans that are not considered marginalized.
Thank you very much for that follow-up question. I think as chair of the commission, I will have that rare opportunity for the first time in this country to look at these special groups, because I identify as one of them and I've seen. So for me, I will lead this commission in transforming the way we do things, in coming up with those strategies, in coming up with those mechanisms and approaches. And remember, as I told the panel before, I am from the Human Rights Commission, and therefore my orientation is in human rights. So I will ensure that a rights-based approach to voter registration, voter education, to the polling is employed. And therefore a rights-based approach will guide us in terms of addressing some of these special needs of these special groups. For example, I will look at how do we enhance the participation of people with disabilities in the electoral processes.
Mr. Ethekon, let's talk first about the marginalized.
The marginalized.
And then we come
All
to the
right, okay,
disabilities
fine.
in that order.
For example, measures, for example, such as how do we reach out to these marginalized groups? There are certain common characteristics. The geographical terrain, the location where these people are. Are they accessible? And if not, can we as a commission then use mechanisms such as mobile voter registration units to reach out to those people in those far-flung and marginalized areas with poor network and communication and transport facilities? Mobile voter registration. There is also the challenge of voter education. How do we reach to these people? Again, we can look at, for example, using local media. There are now, luckily, with the advent of devolution, we have counties and many people have invested in vernacular radio stations. Even in Turkana, we have a number of them, Joka FM and all this. So this, as a commission, we work with these vernacular radio stations to reach out to those people who have not gone to school and who can understand the local language, so that then we can disseminate the information and voter education around that. Then during polling, some of the factors that drive the low voter turnout in these areas, you find in some of these areas in northern Kenya, there's a drought, for example, during an election. People would rather concentrate on looking for the basic survival than go and vote, because that's a luxury to them. Areas where there's insecurity. Because of insecurity, people fear to go and vote. And in some cases, I'm told, Chair, with your permission, in some cases we are told, in some regions, during elections is actually, that is the season for cattle rustling. Because, you know why? The security are occupied supporting the election process, providing security around elections. Therefore, once they are reassigned, then you leave a vacuum. And therefore, these cattle rustlers come in. So those are some of the challenges these people. So as a commission chair, I will therefore work around the clock to ensure that we address those security challenges in those areas that suppress their vote. Issues of drought, for example, working with special programs and county governments to ensure that those populations actually can get, some supplies, some food, some relief, emergency relief food, to enable them get something in their tummies so that they can actually be there to exercise their vote and their universal suffrage.
Now let's go to the persons with disabilities. In the same measure, how do we ensure that the persons with disabilities, their needs are taken care of during the electoral processes throughout the entire electoral cycle, and that their will does count again at the ballot?
Thank you. A very specific question to a very specific group. I think, in my view, this is sort of like that group of persons living with disabilities is a group that we tend to keep them silent. They're there, but the attitude of our society is that maybe they don't matter in terms of them, even those people living with disability who want to contest for elections and those ones who want to vote. Because you look, most of the time, even during election campaigns, how many political parties or politicians go out to meet specifically with these groups to listen to them and to beg for their votes. So I think as a commission, we will work to focus on the special needs. But first we have to understand their special needs. For example, there are people who are differently able, there are people who have different types of disabilities. So we need to understand so that we make our responses, our interventions to those specific needs. For example, voting by using Braille. Can we integrate that in technology so that then we have that as part of the solution? There are those barriers that prevent these people from, for example, even coming out to contest in party primaries and in general elections. For example, the issue of costs. These are groups that might not be endowed with the resources. These are groups that have to deal with cultural prejudices or the barriers. How do we then sensitize the public to be able to give them a chance, just like any other Kenyan, to be able to overcome those barriers, to exercise their right under Article 38.
Thank you. Then let's move to the next category of voters who are youth. We have recently experienced a lot of dissatisfaction and, strong will coming from the young people, the Gen Zs as we call them. So how do we take care of them in the electoral processes to ensure that they participate either through contesting, and if not, when they vote during the polling stations, their needs, the youth?
Thank you very much. Again, my understanding is that from reading the post-election audit report of what transpired in 2022, this category of voters, the youth, were actually a significant number, around 39 point something, close to 40%. So in terms of the real numbers, around 9 million. And this group, of course, you can see their level of participation in an election where the voter turnout was about 64 point something percent. So this group, until of course recently, was again a silent sort of majority until last year when they expressed their views on what they felt. And I think as a commission, as the chair of the commission, given an opportunity, it is something that I will be alive to, and I will seek to engage with the youthful populations of this republic, given that they are now a significant number. And we're looking at, in terms of projections, maybe in the next election, if they are mobilized properly, if they register in large numbers, if they are taken through voter education so that they know even how to vote, this will be a game changer terms of a population category in our election. So in terms of then, therefore, measures to bring them on board and to cater for them in our electoral processes, I think as a commission, one of the things we'll do, we will revitalize the Youth Engagement Committee. It'll be a specific committee, and I would love to chair such a committee. But so that then we work with their leadership, we work with these groups to identify what are some of these tools that we can use. For example, the use of technology. These are tech-savvy people, where these are people who are in spaces such as X, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. So we can work with them and the big technology companies to see how do we reach out to these groups, what language do we use. I'm even suggesting maybe we can use the AI and algorithms to see how do we specifically target them and what kind of messages. So in terms of voter mobilization for them to register, but also to use technology platforms to be able to sensitize them so that by 2027, they are ready to exercise their constitutional rights.
Thank you for that. And moving on to the last category of vote people that I would like us to talk about, this is the diaspora vote. If you recall, the High Court had to, I think 2013, had to make orders that to the Iebc to ensure that the people in the diaspora were granted the chance to exercise their right to vote. Subsequently, there have been progressive realization of that right in regard to the people in diaspora. A few centers in the world have used the embassies to vote. So having been one of those persons from your own experiences who has extensively been living in abroad, what measures then do you foresee, if we become successful, that can be utilized to ensure that the right to vote for people in diaspora is realized and that the Iebc can put in place?
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that question. Again, on the right on the rights under Article 38. The diaspora group, these are Kenyans. For one reason or another, they have left the country to look for education, to look for economic empowerment. I think this category is key, particularly given that their contribution even to our economy. Diaspora remittances. So it's a big constituency, even in terms of our taxes. So I think for me, this is a group that I want to take it to account and to focus on. I do understand there have been incremental gains from, I think, about 5 polling stations or countries to now about 12 countries in the last election. And therefore, we are making progress. As you rightly pointed out, the Constitution gives these people the same rights as us, but it says progressive realization. So that, of course, because of the nature and the logistics involved. So as a new commission, duly constituted, in the next few months, we will have a platform, whether it's online or otherwise, to engage with this category, with our Kenyans in diaspora, so that then we can understand what is it that we can do differently to improve their progressive realization of these rights. And of course, we have to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and particularly the Department of Diaspora Affairs, to ensure that how can we structure our registration centers around the embassies and consulates. Maybe even radically we can suggest possibilities of these groups also doing special voting. For example, mail voting or online registration from where they are. So we can look at also the process issues and see what is it that we can we can change, and that might require also changes in law, so that to accommodate the participation of these groups in the electoral processes. Thank you.
And lastly from me, coming back to the issues of voter suppression, intimidation, and bribery on the voting day, on the polling day, if we may talk about it that way. What are some of those measures that are needed as a way of reform, law reform, policy reform, to ensure that prosecution of those offenses, voter intimidation, bribery, is taken care of?
Thank you. I think we've witnessed, we're not talking hypothetically, but practically we've seen in the previous elections incidences of violence, intimidation, harassment, voter bribery, and we're almost making it sort of look normal, especially voter bribery, for example. And you see, even in some places, you are told, the old ladies, mamas, they'll tell you, my vote is 1,000. So if you don't have 1,000, don't even talk to me. So it happens even in our rural areas. And I think, of course, there are many other factors that drive that. So we, as a commission, to ensure the integrity, to ensure the fairness of the electoral processes, so that people exercise their choices on free will, not out of being induced either by money or by some treats or by force through intimidation and threats. So we need to sort out this as a country. And therefore, when you look at the Election Offences Act, we need to look at, are those offenses, are the penalties in the Election Offences Act adequate? For example, I do know voter bribery will attract, for example, a fine of $1 million and maybe imprisonment of, I think, 6 months or 1 year, somewhere there. But anyway, my point is, are those penalties adequate? So we need to look at the Election Offences Act to see whether the penalties match the severity of these offenses that are committed during elections. Number two, in terms of election security, how do we improve our election security around the election period, up to the polling and the declaration of results? So can we then ensure that we structure our security arrangements so that then our security officers are there to arrest some of these situations, including the incidences of violence? So that then, of course, again, working with the investigative agencies. That's why we bring in the office of the DPP to prosecute, to investigate and prosecute some of these offenses. Of course, I've mentioned working with our police to increase, but also more importantly, that's a bit of the hard approach. If we take the soft approach of being a peace builder, can we then take measures to ensure that we sensitize our populations on the counterproductiveness of violence, intimidation, and bribery, so that then we're able to explain to them, to educate them on the importance of avoiding some of these tactics that actually disenfranchise our populations.
All right. As a follow-up question, I hear you proposing harsher penalties and sentencing, measures. But I'm wondering, there is an existing legal framework today that seeks to deal with these issues. In my view, the problem is not actually maybe the law. The problem could be that that law is not being implemented, is not being enforced, and as you said, we have started taking it normal and casual. The bribery issues, the violence, the harassment, the intimidation of voters that at the end up suppressing voters on the polling day. My concern, and where I would like us to maybe clarify, how do you see Iebc come in that area? The law exists. I hear you on your proposals, but in the context of the existing legal framework, what would be the IBC's role to ensure that these offences are taken care of? I hear the conversation on the DPP, the IG, but does the IBC have any role outside these other agencies, these other government agencies?
Thank you. I think IBC has a role because one of the mandates, one of the functions of IBC that the Constitution has bestowed clearly is monitoring compliance, especially with political parties. Political parties have to comply with certain legal requirements. For example, IEBC can take action, including disqualifying some parties from participating in elections or some individuals who are culpable for some of these election offenses. But I agree with you. The legal framework is there. The enforcement bit is weak or lacking in some cases or in most cases. But I think IBC also in terms of, for example, we're just talking about prevention of that electoral violence and intimidation. In 2010 and 2013, we had a peaceful referendum in 2010. 2013, we had a peaceful election, generally. We didn't have major incidents. But not because there were no, these things were not there. They were there. But again, as I mentioned to you earlier, the conflict early warning and early response system, which was robust and was able to penetrate across the country, was able to pick up some of these incidences of violence, intimidation, and then action was taken to forestall them. So I think we can work with partners to run that election security arrangement program anchored on a robust conflict early warning and early response system to be able to capture these incidences. And for me, prevention is better than cure. And it has happened in this country before. And it's something that I'm really willing to share that experience with the Commission and all the stakeholders, how we did it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ethicon. I wish you well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. In the interest of time, allow me to ask Madam Koki to also ask her questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Ethicon, karibu tena, and thank you for a very elaborate response to some of the questions relating to elections, electoral process, and cycle. I would like to just ask two brief questions around the electoral cycle. You have spoken a lot about issues relating to elections operations plans, post-election reviews, legal reforms, and proposed a number of ways to address some of the challenges in elections. I wanted to just, in view of the fact that the IEBC may be reconstituted in a short while, it means that we have very short period of time before the next election. So in the process of electoral cycle, it also means that we will be required, you will be required to lead a process that will address all the electoral cycle activities and the phases that usually take 5 years to be accomplished, and you'll be required to do that in 2 years and 4 months, to be precise, actually. I want you to tell the panel, if you are given the opportunity to become the chair of the electoral, the IEBC, what would be your priorities? I don't want to ask you about the electoral cycle. Clearly, you understand what it is. But then you also understand the gravity of what needs to be done before the next election. And in fact, this is a special period. We are also required to conduct boundary delimitation, which is also a whole big process. So I just want you to tell the panel and to reassure Kenyans who are watching, when you are given the opportunity to be the chair of the IEBC, how are you going to prioritize and manage these processes that are legally required before the next election? That's part one of the question.
Thank you, Ambassador Koki Moli. I am very happy to see you here. When I used to be in the human rights, our paths used to cross frequently. Allow me then to give my responses to these very vexing questions, because every Kenyan is thinking about the same, that now that it has taken this long to have IEBC in place, the commissioners, and yet we have all these pressing issues that are pending. So allow me then to tell Kenyans, because I'm sure they are watching, many of them, that one of the very, very first tasks that I will undertake as a chair, together with the commissioners and working closely with our secretariat, is to look at, number one, what are these pending issues post-2022 elections that require the attention and decisions of the Commission. Because the Commission takes decisions as a body corporate. So we will look at, for example, matters related to the pending by-elections. I know there are about, I think, 7 of them, or 12. There are issues around, of course, boundary delimitation, for which the constitutional time limits for review lapsed last year around March. And then, of course, there's now where the rubber meets the road, the 2027 elections. How can we then work backwards from the August date to where we begin our work as a commission? And I must tell Kenyans then, therefore, that the reason why this exercise is being undertaken is so that to have the 7 commissioners who will be a board corporate, who are responsible for initiating some of these actions through either gazetting some processes to begin. So as the new chairman, if I'm successful, I will work with my secretariat and colleagues to look at how do we then sort out the issue of the by-elections. How do we initiate that process? Number 2, the issue of boundaries, as you have mentioned. What then needs to be done now that the constitutional time limits has lapsed? So we look at it, I am sure, before the time lapsed, because I know we have a secretariat, and I know these are some of the most professional Kenyans running that secretariat. We will find out as a commission to what extent had they begun the preparatory processes towards the boundary review and delimitations. So we'll look at the work already done, see what needs to be taken forward. But there are also, Ambassador, with your permission, there are also certain hard questions we have to ask ourselves. Now that this boundary delimitation constitutional time limit has ended, what are we supposed to do next? So we will have to seek, for example, dialogue with the judiciary, the Office of the Attorney General, to sort out the legal issues. Then number 2, we also have to bring on board stakeholders to have a discussion around the boundary delimitation vis-a-vis the timelines for the general election, which you have rightly mentioned that they are tight. So we have to make a decision as a country whether we can undertake both these exercises at the same time, or we focus as a country to planning and executing the 2022 elections. And this is an open discussion. We don't have the answers as a commission, but what I assure Kenyans is that we will call that dialogue so that we can address these very, very critical issue. Number three, in terms of the IEBC itself, I am aware that their strategic plan, which is the document that guides the Commission in terms of execution of its mandate, may have expired, and therefore their preparatory processes towards coming up with a new strategic plan. So priority as chair would be for us to finalize that strategic plan, because strategic plan is a document that will guide us in terms of delivery of not only the general election, but also other critical processes, including the boundary delimitation. So our focus will be to look at that strategic plan, to approve it, and then from the strategic plan, we can now derive the electoral operations plan, and of course many other plans, including the security. We sort out the funding issues. So for us, once we have this strategic policy guiding documents, and we are very comfortable as commissioners, remember we'll also be new, maybe most of us, if we are successful, we will have to very quickly internalize this and then roll out. And where certain decisions will require me as a chairman to gazette so that we initiate them, I will do so as soon as practicable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the answers that you have provided, and just hope that as you pray and hope that the Secretariat has done a lot more preparations for the administrative work, and we expect that they have done that in terms of preparing for the election, so that you or anyone else who gets this opportunity is able to plug in the processes and just ensure that the processes that require gazettement or require the commission are taken care of. Just lastly, I know the boundary delimitation will consequently resort to fresh registration of voters, and of course there are younger voters who have since become of age that will be registering, and that requires another big job of cleaning the voters register, updating it and making it current. And all this work requires something you have mentioned called budget and funding. How are you going to address that issue? We have read that the Secretariat had proposed or asked for some money, and I just want us to discuss briefly on the issue of budgeting and the issue of your 6 colleagues, because being a member of the IEBC does not necessarily require you to have specific skills and competencies that you may require. So it may require some induction or some training. How are you going to deal with this to bring together this team and to get the necessary funding and budget to carry out the work?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the issue of funding of IBC and the elections and other processes, including delimitation, if we go there, will require us to engage with the Parliament, because that's the one that holds the purse strings. We will need to also engage with the Treasury to see how we can unlock some of these things. You know, our elections, of course, my understanding is sometimes you read in the media and elsewhere, is one of those expensive elections. And I know, of course, there are those cost drivers. So as a commission, we are aware that, of course, because we live in this country, we are aware of the limitations of the resources because of the hard economic times, not only in Kenya, but globally. So we will look at what we can get from the exchequer. But first and foremost, we will have, as new commissioners, we have to sit with our secretariats to understand the costing element, the cost aspects of our work. so that then, even as we seek funding, whether it's 60 billion, as I've read it in the media, or 100 billion, we know exactly what we are talking about. And as a project manager, one of the things that experiences and skills that I've built over time is that element of costing the various tasks and units. So you attach certain units cost to some things. So we will have to interrogate that budget or come up with a new budget proposal so that then we engage the key stakeholders in that respect. But allow me also to mention, some years back when I was at UNDP, we used to support the Iebc in terms of funding certain processes. And I think I did also Kenyans to be comfortable. UN is an intergovernmental body, so it's not some NGO there trying to influence things in this country. This is an intergovernmental body that has the credibility and the capacity to support. But we as a commission will also look around and say, hey, who else can help us where there are certain funding gaps so that they can plug in. But we need to be very clear on what is it that we are costing, how much, and where are we getting these resources from, so that even when we are talking about the looking around for our partners, we are able to tell them this is where the deficit is and this is where we need their support. So I think that issue. And then, of course, internally, the issue of commissioners and induction. I think that's one of the first assignments we will have to undertake so that everybody is comfortable. When we are talking about budgeting or electoral processes and partnerships, then everybody's on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ethekon, and thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. This time I'd like to ask FCPA Tanui to ask some questions.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Karibu Bwana Ethekon. A question related to what Ambassador has asked you about the funding. Now I want to look at the accountability part of it. If you look at the Auditor General reports, Iebc accounts have always been qualified. I don't know whether they have gotten any unqualified report. Reason being that there are issues touching on procurement matters, how they have accounted for the funds allocated. So as you rightly put it, you'll look for funding from Treasury, you'll get UNDP and other donors to support. But the major issue that has been there at Iebc is accountability of the funds. And you will note the Public Accounts Committee reports. If you're to look at them, there are many key audit matters that have been raised. So as the chair, yes, we do know you are not the accounting officer, but you are the head of that institution. You are the head of the electoral management body. And yes, there is an accounting officer, but you are responsible for the commission as a chair. So what mechanism will you put in place, or what strategies will you put in place to ensure that there is accountability in the resources that you have been allocated?
Thank you, CPA Tanui. And CPA Tanui, for your information, I attempted to follow your footsteps by studying CPA some years back after high school, but I managed only to reach CPA 2, thereabouts. Then I dropped it.
Yeah, so you can still continue.
Thank you. I think with this enormous task ahead, I may postpone it to a later date. But thank you very much, CPA Tanui. I think the question of accountability, because we have scarce resources in this country, and those institutions entrusted with these resources must understand that even to be an accounting officer of Iebc or the chair, these are positions that you hold in trust for the benefit of the people of Kenya. And one of those duties and obligations imposed upon us by law is to ensure that we account for and we are transparent in a manner in which we expend public resources. So as a chair, as a new chair, I will actually begin by taking a sample of some of these reports, the previous reports, to be able to understand where is the problem. Because the auditors' reports, they have done their assignment thoroughly, and they have pointed out where there are these loopholes. So as a commission, to be able to seal some of these loopholes, we have to understand where the problems comes from, whether it's in procurement, whether it's in disbursements. So we will interrogate these reports, see the clear recommendations of the Auditor General, but also the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee, so that then we have to set up an implementation framework and timelines on how we are going to address those. It could be that maybe the money has not been lost or eaten. It could be that there are certain weaknesses in terms of the internal processes, and therefore we need to strengthen our financial management and risk management processes and procedures and policies. Number two, I do know in any corporate institution, there is always an internal audit and risk management kind of arrangement or committee that is normally headed by a professional outside there, probably a member of the Iebc. And therefore, I believe the Commission has such a committee, audit and risk. We will look at the role of that committee in terms of helping us to manage some of these financial and fiduciary risks and risks associated with procurement issues, so that then we can seal the loopholes and hopefully move towards getting that unqualified report which we saw, which everybody desires in any corporate institution such as Iebc. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also acknowledge the many qualifications that you have, even the CPA too. So congrats on that. Now, my second question is Hassan, the former chair, Iebc. Actually, in his book, he talks of to be a chair of the Electoral Commission. He calls some 3 Gs, and one of the 2 Gs that I remember is that you need to have grandchildren, you need to be playing golf. And I was looking at your age, and I was wondering whether you meet any of those criteria. So what do you tell people who are saying you could be young enough to be the chair of Iebc?
Thank you, CPA Tandui. Maybe looks are deceiving. I don't know. But at the age of 48, going to 49, I think this is the prime. This is the best age any professional can wish for, to be in positions of higher calling and higher responsibility. So to me, I feel I have the energy, I have the aptitude, the intellectual alertness, I have the necessary tools in terms of education and experience. And looking even forward, I believe if I do a splendid job in this running this commission for the next 6 years, it's basically I'll have something to tell my grandchildren because I'll still be alive to tell them the stories and the younger generations of this country. So for me, this is the right age. Thank you.
Lastly, given the nature of our politics, and you rightly said looks may be deceiving, and I've actually listened to you, I think, for the last 1 hour, and I'm figuring out what transpired at KICC in 2007. You remember when the chair of Iebc there, Kivuitu, was at KICC, and just the other day at Bomas of Kenya, and looking at Ethicon today, you know, the presentation that you've had, you're mean, you know, you're humble, and those demonstrations that happen after the elections, people are walking to your office at Iebc, and they say they want to see the chair, or you're preparing for 2027 elections, and you have a stakeholder meeting. We are convening in a room like this, and there are players, active players in the elections, and they are demanding. Do you have that stamina to address those presidential candidates that have walked into Iebc headquarters, that are confronting you and demanding that you do certain things in a particular way? What can you say of that?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I think it is very serious what in the last, in some of these elections, like the ones you have cited, that those incidents happened in the Republic of Kenya. It is very sad, it's very unfortunate. As proud Kenyans who take this country as our proud home, because we don't have any other country, for us to degenerate to a level where we reach to those I don't know even how to describe those incidences, but as a country, in as much as I, as an individual chair in that hotspot, will have to think on my feet and how to handle the situation. But I would like also to call upon the entire country, the people of this republic, right from this panel, to think, why do we and how did we get to that level? What are these underlying issues as a society that we must look at for us not to be? For most people, you know, CPA Tanui and the distinguished panel, with your permission, Chair, even applying for this job is pressure itself. I will speak from my heart. There are those who say, congratulations, go for it. You have what it takes. Then there are those who are saying, no. You're going there, you're going to die, they're going to beat you, they're going to do this, all this negativity. And the sum total of it, when I soul search myself, I say, but even if I don't go there, who will do it? Some Kenyan must do this job. Unless we are talking about outsourcing it to somebody in India, somebody in Latin America, or wherever. But if the Constitution says a Kenyan citizen, because that's what's in the law, must do this job, then somebody has to do it. And that's why I'm here precisely, well aware of those pressures. But for me, as an individual, I know I have the stamina, the strength, the mental capacity to withstand those fracas. But as a commission, we'll put in place measures to try, learning from experience, to avoid those measures. Both, of course, security, immediate, but more importantly for me, I will open up this conversation to stakeholders, to the people of Kenya. Why do we have to get to that level of violence in front of cameras, in front of the whole world? That a process that we have taken time and invested a lot of money in, we've cast our vote, we've counted at the polling station. And now we, at that point, when we now want to declare the final results, then we lapse into that kind of anarchy. So for me, as a chair and as a new commission, we will begin to work with the electoral stakeholders. There are, of course, the political elites. That's where the problem is. We have to talk to this group and say, you can compete, you can win, but you can also prepare not to win. Because ultimately, it's the will of Kenyans that shall prevail. It is that vote at that polling station that determines your fate. So therefore, we have a conversation on how is it that we can manage situations where I am not the winner. And I would like to inform this distinguished panel of an experience that we had in 2013, where we had the two sides and many other candidates, and we were aware of such kind of things. And that's why it never happened 2013. The reason why it never happened is we working outside there, and I think it was that time the Isaka-san was chair. We supported what you call mediation processes by some of our elders in this country, elders, both men and women, of a certain stature in the private sector, in the public service. We brought them together to be our interlocutors, to be the bridge between Iebc and the presidential candidates. And we got some of the close relatives of some of these presidential candidates to speak to them, some of their business partners, to whisper, to say, hey, if in case, in the event that your votes don't reach that threshold, remember, you still have business in this country. You still have your daughter in this country, your grandchildren in this country. You have a country to protect. And therefore, whatever happens, let us take the legal route, which is go file a petition, ventilate the issue at the Supreme Court, whatever the outcome, let the country move on. We did it. And I remember, if you recall, those of us who were there at that time, you remember peace charters.